All right, everybody. This is Project Herpetoculture Podcast, episode 39. I'm your host, Roy Arthur Blodgett, joined most of the time by the dashing Philip Leitz of Airs Only, but he's taking the night off, so I'm flying solo. Wish me luck. And before I introduce our guest, I'm going to do our quick housekeeping and give a shout out to Dylan and the Animals at Home Network for hosting us. It continues to be an honor and a privilege to be part of this network, and so really want to express some gratitude to him and to also the other shows on the network, which are awesome. So and also want to thank our sponsors. We have Custom Reptile Habitats. They're making some amazing PVC reptile enclosures. It's largely what I use here for a lot of my larger vivariums. And we have a little affiliate link in our bio. If you make a purchase through that link, we'll get a small kickback at no additional cost to you. And that helps us keep the lights on over here. We also have Cold Blooded Caffeine, who also just released for us a nice private label coffee. It's the light roast Rwandan coffee. It's delicious. And they donate a little bit to conservation and coffee growing regions with each bag of coffee purchased. So that's awesome. And if you apply the code Project Herp at checkout, you'll get 10% off your order with them. And then lastly, we have Redline Shipping for all your reptile shipping needs. They continue to be just knocking it out of the park for me this season with some excellent customer service, and just really appreciate their support of our show. And before I introduce our guest, I also want to give a shout out to Charlie, Mr. Make Luck Marketing, who edits our audio and really just keeps the train on the tracks over here. Phil and I are both running around like headless chickens most of the time these days, which is part of the reason why Phil's taking the night off. And we really would not be able to do this without Charlie. So I want to give some gratitude to him. And with all that out of the way, I'm very pleased to introduce our guest for the night, which is Bill Stewart. Bill, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be a part of this tonight. I've been really looking forward to this for a while.
Yeah, likewise. Me too. You've been on our list for a while as someone I wanted to contact, and
that's crazy.
I'm really grateful for your willingness to come onto the show. So
you bet.
Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
And just to start out, could you just tell us a little bit about your kind of background and origins in herpetoculture, how you found yourself in the noble trade that we partake in here?
I'll try and do the abridged version of it. It goes way, way, way back. I mean, I loved these animals as a kid. I have the same story that a lot of us had. Like, I loved dinosaurs. I was fascinated by dinosaurs. And then when I was 5, I found a garter snake, and then I was hooked into reptiles. I think we all share a very similar trajectory. My mom growing up, my parents were awesome and very supportive. And my mom having an allergy to most furry animals, we couldn't have dogs or cats as pets. And I think they bought me a guinea pig when I was like 4, and she was allergic to that. And so I was like, oh, so hey, I could maybe have reptiles as pets, right? You're not allergic to those. And I was like 9 or 10 years old when I got my first pair of just green anoles. I bought my first corn snake when I was 15 years old, when I got my first check from my first job at Little Caesars Pizza. So I've been keeping these animals as pets since I was a kid. I mean, I think I was 15 years old in 1990. I've been keeping them for a really long time. I took a hiatus from the hobby for 10 years when I was married, and then divorced, and then got back into the hobby again. And I didn't realize that there was like a social media community or hobby until I think 2013 or 2014. I became really good friends with Ryan McVeigh, who used to be the executive director for the Herp Society. He's now with VivTech, and I met him and became really good friends with him. And this whole world of this hobby opened up to me. So I've been keeping these animals forever, and just didn't know that there was a community where I could go. I like Tinley. I didn't learn about Tinley till like 2014. Like, what? I could go and buy these animals. I don't have to like go in the back of a magazine. That's how I used to do it when I was a kid. So, meeting Ryan McVeigh, and meeting some of the people in the hobby helped me kind of get into it. Also, I've been with the Madison Herp Society now since 2014. I was a volunteer. I took on a position as an event coordinator. I became the president of the Milwaukee chapter when we started that. And then at the end of 2021, Ryan stepped down and I took over as the executive director. I've been at Zilla, so I'm an assistant lab tech at Zilla. I don't have a gigantic role at Zilla. I'm kind of helping them now with blogs and social media posts to make sure information is accurate. I used to help test some of the products. I'm still at Zilla very, very part-time. And I'm with Badgerland Reptile Rescue now. My wife opened Badgerland in 2021. We're a 501c3 reptile rescue in Kenosha. And I do kind of on the side my own educational birthday parties. I could just talk, man. I was breeding animals for a long time. When I got back into the hobby, I started breeding. I was breeding leopard geckos and tokays and cresties, and then I started getting into chihuahuas, and I started getting into some of the weird oddball desert geckos, and I liked all the weird ones that no one ever heard of before. So I was breeding for a really long time. And then in like the last 3 or 4 years, I took a huge step back from breeding and just kind of more focusing on education and teaching people about these animals. And it was right around 2019 where I started having some like light bulbs go off about the therapeutic, like the therapy implications of these animals. And just there's so many different directions that you could take with using these animals as therapy tools, helping, they could be coping mechanisms for people. I've been in mental health for 25 years now. I got my bachelor's degree in 97. I graduated with my bachelor's in psych in 97, and then I got my master's in 2003. And I became a licensed clinical social worker in 2005. So I've been practicing since then. And I opened my own therapy clinic in Kenosha in 2013. So we're celebrating our 10-year anniversary this June, which is really exciting. Nice. We have 130 families that we work with in the Kenosha County area. And it's just incredible work. But having the mental health profession and the reptile hobby, I really started like seeing like similarities. And I'm not going to say kids are like reptiles, because they're not. They're kids. But there's so many similarities in behaviors and function of behaviors. And it really started to fascinate me. And then just the implications of using these animals within the therapy environment really started to take shape for me. So it's been pretty neat.
That's amazing. Yeah, I'm really excited to kind of dig deeper into all of that with you. It's a big part of, it's a big interest for me as well. And I'm curious though, so you mentioned you took this 10-year hiatus away, and then you kind of came back and realized that, social media kind of coalesced, around the reptile world. And I totally relate to that. I'm curious, like what was the timeline like on that when you came back?
So my ex and I separated in 2009. And then it was right around 2011, I was renting like a condo, like a 1-bedroom condo, and I'd have my kids on the weekends. And I just bought a couple leopard geckos from Petco, and I bought a couple tokays from a local shop. I've kept tokays since 1990 also. I absolutely love those geckos. I'm glad they're like really popular now too, because they deserve it. They're awesome animals. But I had social media. I had Facebook. I was on MySpace. Remember that?
Oh yeah.
But the worlds never crossed over. And I had made a handful of friends. I think there was a local Milwaukee reptile group, or it was like someone added me to it. And then I learned that you could connect with people through reptiles on Facebook. I had no idea. In my mind, they were just separate. Oh, I have my reptiles. I go to pet shops to buy reptiles, or surf Craigslist for anything that needs a home. And then, I met Ryan in person at a Herp Society show, and then added him on Facebook and saw the friends he had, and then made friends from there. And it blew up like crazy. It was really cool. And I met just some incredible people in the hobby.
Yeah. Oh man. So same here. Yeah. No better person to kind of reintroduce you to than Ryan,
Yeah, he's a great guy.
Great dude. And
yeah, I met some awesome people. There's a couple other hobby people. One of my really good friends is a guy named Charles Sherman, who used to do tundra exotics. He used to breed dart frogs. He's been out of the hobby, but meeting him in person and kind of connecting with him. My friend Rex is local. He's a tarantula breeder, and it was so cool to have this social network that grew. I didn't. Totally. I was in this Facebook group, and I'm like, what? And then this was before, like, when you could still like buy animals on Facebook, and there would be auctions and like Facebook groups, and I'm like, what is this magic? It's crazy.
So what happened with me was I left herpetoculture in 2007, and I was 16 at the time.
Okay.
And was in a pretty rough home environment, and basically just needed to get out of that environment and get out on my own, and that precipitated getting rid of all my animals so I could, effectively do that. And at that time when I left, 2007, 2008, right around there, Kingsnakecom was like the center of gravity within herpetoculture. That's where everything was happening.
King Snake and fauna,
yeah, King Snake and fauna, right? But like the conversations, especially on King Snake and the forums and stuff.
Yeah.
And when I came back, I didn't know where to start. So I go on Kingsnake.com, and like the forums are all dead now, and I'm like, what? Oh, there's nothing happening anymore. And eventually I connected with somebody, an old contact of mine, and he was like, oh yeah, it's all on Facebook now. And I didn't have Facebook because I kind of rebelled against it a little bit. I'd had one when I was a teenager and I deleted it. And anyway, so I reluctantly made a Facebook again and was like, oh my God, it has exploded. Like it was just like so much going on, and it was a group for every species or taxa, and it's just like, okay, this is what's happening now. And
it's crazy.
It continues to blow me away.
It does. I remember this moment, I think it was 2014 Tinley, where I was walking around and just blown away by the amount of species of different, and I was like a gecko guy. Like I love geckos. They're fascinating animals to me. Mm-hmm. And just like blown away with the pet geckos. You go to a brick and mortar and you see like leopard geckos and a cresty, and every once in a while there's like an oddball one, a golden gecko, like, ooh. And you go to Tinley and it's just, it blew me away. And there was a vendor back in 2014 who had Strophaeus tanacauta. I don't know if you've ever seen those before. The Australian, the Strophaeus genus. And I had seen those geckos, and I had seen pictures of them in magazines. And to me, in my mind, I'm like, that's just a holy grail animal. That's incredible. Like that would be such a cool thing to have. And then being at Tinley in 2014 and seeing them on a table, and I was like, this is insane. It was just the feeling in my body, and I bought it. I took it home. He literally just passed like 2 weeks ago. So I bought him as an adult male. I bought him as an adult male in 2014. And he just crashed like just a couple of weeks ago. I was kind of sad, but the whole idea of seeing this, because when we get into, and I don't want to, we don't have to get into it at this moment in the conversation, but when I look at all the different implications for therapy and for therapeutic support in the hobby, like my brain goes in all these different directions. But the community aspect of the reptile hobby is really, I know there's toxicity here and there, and sometimes if you spend too much time on Facebook, there's a lot of drama. But I go to these shows in person, and there's not like one type of person at these shows. You see, people with dyed hair and piercing and tattoos, and then behind it is an old couple in their turtlenecks, and then behind them is a dude in a suit and a tie, and like there's just everyone likes these animals. Everyone who likes these animals don't just fit into some pigeonhole, category. We're a very diverse group of people who also keep reptiles, and you can find a lot of acceptance in that. And if you're feeling isolated or you're feeling alone, there's a huge positive acceptance piece to just being a part of this reptile hobby. I know there's beef, and I know I'm not trying to ignore any drama that happens, but it's the hobby always seems to embrace people, welcomes
totally
you.
Agree with that.
So
yeah,
it's very cool. I shout out the hobby for that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. I totally relate to that and agree. It's like, I don't know, it's been interesting for me because, since kind of coming back to herpetoculture and now doing the podcast, it seems like more and more of my community is related to herpetoculture. My friendships and stuff like that are related to herpetoculture, but at the same time, it's so strange because it's all dispersed, right? It's like, I don't know anyone that lives where I live that keeps herps, that I hang out with or anything really at all, which is really trippy. I just went to like the Sacramento Reptile show, which is a couple hours away from me, and I met like 5 people, you know, from the podcast or whatever for the first time. And it's interesting. It's really interesting just the way in which like social media has kind of changed relationships and especially
Yeah.
like once you find these like enclaves and niches, you know, where there's like shared special interests and all that stuff, it can really, it's like, oh wow, it's like suddenly you have these friendships where it's like you're sharing your life story with somebody who's like literally on the opposite end of the country or something. And I don't know, I
Yeah.
love that. I think it's really cool.
Social media is a double-edged sword, definitely. But I've
Yeah.
seen the positives in it a lot more than the negatives. And anytime I see a negative now, I've just learned to like ignore it, block, whatever, and just move on.
Yeah.
I might have maybe created a little bit of a echo chamber for myself, but my social media is my friends and the people that I want to interact with. That's what it's for.
Yeah.
And you know, back in the day, if I wanted to learn about something, I would ride my bike to the library and buy Felipe's book. But now I
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
Facebook message Felipe, hey, I got a question
Yeah.
for you.
Yeah.
It's so cool how social media has connected us.
Yeah. Oh,
That's
totally.
a whole topic for a whole nother podcast, is like
Oh
the
yeah.
pros and cons of social media. But I've
I
met
know. I know.
incredible
It's
people through it. So the hobby's been very
yeah,
awesome.
absolutely. Well, I mean, you spoke a little bit to the hats you're currently wearing in herpetoculture already, but I'm wondering if you could expand on that a little bit. Maybe tell us a little bit about Badgerland.
Yeah.
What's the story there? And
So
yeah.
besides Impact Child and Family Therapies in Kenosha is my mental health clinic, and that's kind of my full-time-ish kind of a job.
Mhm.
Um, and then I work very, very part-time with Zilla. I'm still trying to help support the brand, help support some of the product development, test the products before they're released. There's only so much
Mhm.
I could do on a team. And I love Zilla's been very awesome to work for. I really enjoy working for that company. They've been a great company to work for. Um, and I have been involved with the Madison Area Herp Society. We're a herp society in Madison, Wisconsin. Right now we have 3 chapters. So we have a Madison chapter, a Fox Valley chapter, and a Milwaukee chapter. And we're like any herp club, we meet once a month. We kind of have agendas that we go over. We always have speakers. We had Emily and Ed from Snake Discovery came out a couple weeks ago, and we're the speakers for April. I have some really cool members of the community being presenters and speakers in upcoming months. We, support our community. So we want to be an information place for, herpers and non-herpers, reptile pet owners who maybe aren't a part of the community. And we embrace everybody to come, and we do educational events in the community. So there's a reptile show that was today in Sturtevant, Wisconsin, Sewer Fest, and we had a booth there just educating people and having conversations with people about keeping these animals and about the role that these animals have in their natural environments. And then Badgerland started in 2021. My wife started it. Her and I both volunteered for a reptile rescue in Illinois. And then when that dissolved kind of during the pandemic, we kind of picked up the torch and opened Badgerland Reptile Rescue in Kenosha. And it functions like a regular reptile rescue would. We attend the educational shows, the reptile shows and stuff as well. But we take in animals for whatever reasons. These reptiles are surrendered for many different reasons. Some are healthy,
Mhm.
some are not. We always quarantine the animals. We always have a vet we work really closely with who's incredibly supportive of us. And when animals get kind of a clean bill of health, they can go up for adoption. And it just functions like a kind of a normal reptile rescue. One thing that's pretty cool about Badgerland is we're foster based. So any animals that come through, they go through our quarantine. We have kind of at least a minimum of 30-day quarantine process. I want to see the
Mhm.
animals' fecals. I want to, check their health, watch their behaviors, make sure that everything seems healthy. If everything seems healthy, a lot of the animals sometimes just need socialization. And so
Mhm.
we have a group of maybe about 18 or 20 different foster families that will take the animal for 3 or 4 months and socialize them, kind of work with them, continue to observe them. They're not animals that have any medical needs, or they're not receiving any kind of treatment. Those animals stay at the facility. And then we are just now getting into really kind of putting animals up for adoption. Badgerland does have you can check out our page on Morph Market. We have animals for adoption on Morph Market. And we do a lot of stuff in Southeast Wisconsin and Northeast Illinois. And then I kind of on the side own WPS Reptiles. It's kind of a corny name. It's just my initials, but it's I do like local in like Kenosha County and maybe Southeast Wisconsin. I do like birthday parties and I bring groups of reptiles to the scouts. Or, you know, I've done other kind of smaller events, larger events, you know, the Herp Society does the smaller birthday parties and stuff I do. And I do charge for those, and then that pays the rent where I keep my animals. So helps pay the bills. So those are kind of the reptile hats that I wear.
Amazing. That's a lot of hats. I mean,
it keeps me busy. And that's another reason why I don't breed anymore. I don't have the energy or time to worry about eggs.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, that's a full slate of responsibilities, and all it sounds like, I mean, a lot of, you know, outreach and a lot of like really gratifying, meaningful work, it sounds like. So
it is. And I love interacting. So I love being out there and talking with people and interacting with people. It's very enjoyable.
Yeah. So, I mean, I obviously I want to talk to you about this intersection between herpetoculture and kind of mental health, and you know, I have my own kind of experience with that. Just like I said earlier, you know, growing up in kind of a rough and tumble home environment, and you know, it occurred to me kind of as I got into my 20s, you know, I started kind of focusing basically essentially on like healing from those early childhood experiences and kind of becoming a functional adult. And a lot of times I would get like reflections from people, you know, who'd kind of hear my life story and stuff like that, and just be like, how the hell are you okay? Like, what's your deal, you know? And I would think about it a lot, and you know, kind of what I went through and what kind of kept me well in some ways. And also just to be super clear, I'm not like in any way trying to like say bad things about my parents or anything like that, who did the best they could with what they had and all that. But what occurred to me is one of the things that really kept me well through that time was herpetoculture, was the fact that like I had animals that I was taking care of, and I had animals that I was interacting with, you know, and that were interacting with me. And I really look at that as like a really formative part of my development and of my, you know, continued well-being. Like, it continues to feel really important to me to have more than human or other than human relationships, if that makes sense. And
it absolutely does. There's such a power in the interaction with animals. And we've explored it in other areas of mental health. So, you know, there's, you know, we've all heard of emotional support animals or service dogs. I mean, there's a whole, you know, gigantic world of people who have service animals that help soldiers with PTSD, help people have epilepsy and seizures. They, you know, and there's just a compassion that comes from that connection with the animal. You know, it used to be an old thing that doctors would say that fish tanks could be therapeutic. If you said a little fish tank, anyone who's kept fish tanks and have cleaned them, it's kind of stressful, but the fish themselves can be calm. And, you know, so, and then, there's animals have become hugely powerful in helping people learn compassion and learn empathy and learn that there's so much more in like a nonverbal communication with people. There's equine therapy where, you know, kids learn how to connect with horses, and I'm not an equine therapist, so my information is limited on it, but horses are very attuned with human emotion. And they can read human emotion. So if a human's angry, the horse can feel the anger. If a human's sad, like, horses can kind of feel people's feelings. Yeah. And so you could teach a lot of empathy through having kids in, you know, youth kind of interact with horses. But again, that's all I'm going to say about equine therapy, because I'm not too hip on it. But I think we've learned so much about the relationship that we have with animals. I mean, why do we keep dogs and cats as pets? I mean, they're companionship and they're caring, and they kind of depend on us, and there's a positive gratification feeling, and it could be esteem building when we're taking care of another thing. And so there's so much power in keeping animals. And I mean, they can help us through, they don't judge us. They don't get mad. I mean, snakes maybe, you know, can get aggressive or whatever, but you know, like it's a powerful interaction for us to like take care of and be the stewards of these animals. And there's so many
Yeah.
benefits that can come from it.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. I totally hear that. I feel like there's something I often think about too, of just like earlier I was actually listening to a podcast with a guy named, I think his name's Davidian Howe. I think his handle is like ethnocynology, but he studies a lot the relationship between humans and dogs, and particularly like in prehistory, trying to like understand the early origins of like kind of domestication, you know, beginning with wolves. And a lot of this is also interesting to me because we have a wolf dog at home.
Oh, that's cool.
But one thing that he was talking about also too is just like a lot of the things that you're saying, but another thing that I think about with it is, you know, in kind of like indigenous cultures and in the majority of our, you know, time as human beings, we lived in much closer relationship with other animals, you know, and saw ourselves as part of natural systems, you know, saw ourselves as part of the ecology in the same way that other animals are, right? And of course that's still true. Like we're still, you know, dependent on our natural systems, but there's so many steps removed at this stage in our, you know,
that's an awesome point. We really have become quite removed from it. You know, we don't have to worry about getting eaten by tigers on the way to work or, you know, whatever. But right, I mean, I think we, in some way, we need to remember that we need to stay connected to, you know, nature and wildlife, because I think we have kind of become removed from it. That's really interesting. I'm gonna have to check that. I'm gonna have to check that out. That's really cool.
Yeah, you should check it out. I think you'd enjoy it. But this also reminds me of like something that there's a writer that I really love named Barry Lopez, and he's an amazing naturalist, or he passed away a couple years ago. But he has spent a lot of time with some indigenous cultures, and one like persistent reflection that he had from them of like Western culture was that that people seem lonely. And it just makes me think of like how in some ways like being further removed from our origins, it can kind of actually create disorders of connection in a way, or of disconnection.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Like
it absolutely does.
So well, I'm curious, like what like you hearing me say that, how does that translate for you in your training?
Well, so what my brain automatically kind of went to when you were saying lonely is, I think in mental health, when someone's dealing with mental health related concerns, whether it be anxiety or depression, you know, in my mental health career, I focused tremendously on attachment and trauma, and how childhood trauma leads to attachment disorders, and how a disruptive attachment with a caregiver can lead to a lot of behavioral issues and challenges in life, and challenges here and there, and our own self-esteem and feeling good about ourselves, and understanding ourselves. And it creates a tremendous challenge for young kids, for children, to go through traumatic experiences and how it affects our sense of self. But, you know, the thing that my brain automatically went to is that kind of feeling of loneliness or isolation that can come with mental health, where I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I'm nervous about this, or I might have this fear because of something that I experienced when I was younger, and I'm embarrassed to tell anybody. I'm embarrassed to share my experiences because I don't want someone to think that something's wrong with me. And there could be a huge feeling of loneliness and isolation with some of the experiences that people have, because they're afraid to ask for help. They feel they need to hide it. They feel people might not understand. And then, you know, we're not going to seek help, or we're not going to try and talk about it because we feel lonely. So that conversation, that's kind of right away where my brain went to. And then that again, really again makes me want to give a huge shout out to the reptile hobby, because mental health is still very stigmatized in our country, and it's still it's kind of a hot topic right now politically. But access to mental health services is still really challenging. The pandemic didn't help. So if someone finally gets to a decision where they want to find a therapist and they want to get help, it's very hard to find one. But a lot of people sometimes don't even get to that decision. The reptile hobby has been very embracive of understanding and compassion towards other people. And that's another like area that I want to go into as I'm just learning more and evolving more on merging these two hobbies or these two interests that I have. Mental health, we still stigmatize it and we're still afraid to talk about it. And but in the reptile hobby, people are very open and very willing to share their stories and willing to support each other. And I always thought that was an incredible thing. I'm friends with a lot of people on Facebook, and I'll see a lot of posts like, my trauma is really bad today, or I got triggered by this, or my anxiety is in a bad way. And there's 150 comments. I feel the same way. I know you'll get through it. And the people in the reptile hobby seem to be less stigmatizing of mental health and more embracing of it and more understanding of it and more supportive of each other through that. And it's so incredible to see. And I wish just the general public would take some of that advice and be more open to sharing their feelings. And so I like that the reptile hobby I like that we could go on Facebook in the reptile hobby and say, I'm having a bad day. My anxiety is really bad. My depression's really high. And everybody is like very warm and supportive and caring. And I think that can help people so much, and especially break those feelings of loneliness and isolation that we can have.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes me think also too of just like how, while the subject of mental health is stigmatized and marginalized within, let's just say American society, because I can't really speak to much beyond that. That's
correct.
The limitation of my own experience. Also, herpetofauna are stigmatized and marginalized, in their own way as like this weird.
Snakes are bad and evil, and they should be dead.
Yeah.
Why would I care about spiders? And exactly.
Yeah.
So, right. So my brain, when I look at like the bridging of mental health and reptiles, I have kind of 3 different categories that I'm trying to put things into to get myself organized, because I want to continue to learn and continue to process this whole thing. And one category is kind of like using these animals as therapy tools. And how can I use the reptiles as a therapy tool or as an analogy to teach things? And I'll get to like my reptile groups that I do in just a second. But that's like one category. And then the other category is looking at people who keep reptiles, and like, I don't know how to do a study, or I don't know how to figure this information out, but I want to look at people who keep these animals and people who are in the hobby, and how many of us in the hobby have struggled with anxiety and struggled with anxiety, depression, traumatic past, childhood traumas or whatever. And is it disproportionate to the general population? So, 26% of Americans have anxiety, but 62% of reptile keepers have anxiety or whatever. Like, I want to know, because then I can answer for myself, but I want to talk to more people about what is it about reptiles that, what is it about the reptile that has drawn you to it, or how are they helping you heal? Because I think there's something particularly unique about reptiles that are doing something for us that cats and dogs or whatever aren't doing. I think there's something really special about them. And then that third category is exactly what you said, like those similarities, behavior is functional. Behavior there's a reason why things behave. And when you look at reptiles, their behavior is functional. They want to find prey to eat. They want to avoid predators so they don't get eaten. They want to make babies of themselves, baby of their species, seek out heat. And so there's reasons why they behave. And then you get into the whole realm of defense mechanisms with reptiles, and their defense mechanisms aren't to be aggressive. It's to protect themselves so they don't die. But yeah, reptiles are misunderstood. And then the same could be said, again, I'm not trying to compare, but young kids with mental health issues are often misunderstood. And a lot of times adults, and again, no blame to anybody, but because it's kind of just nature to be this way, but we look at the overt behaviors and not the function of it. So if your kid is screaming and yelling and punching holes in the walls, it's hard to like look at, well, what's creating this behavior? Because you're like, stop punching holes in my wall. But it helps to get to the function of it and to see those similarities in the functional behaviors between people, and again, behavior is functional. There's reasons why.
Mhm.
And so we all kind of understand the reasons why reptiles do things. We all know these animals well enough to know, oh, it's too hot, or it's too cold, or it is afraid, or it's hungry, or it's brumating, or whatever. And then how can I take those to, again, translate, kids' overt behaviors and kids acting out are for reasons, and we have to figure out those reasons too. So there's
Yeah,
those are
totally.
kind of the three areas that I do. I do reptile groups. I have to start them again in June with the kids in Kenosha, but I do like reptile groups where I'll get 6 or 8 kids that come to the office. They're usually about an hour or an hour and a half. And just for starters, if you have children who are distractible, kids with ADHD that maybe have a hard time focusing on something, or they hyper focus on one thing and kind of miss the other stuff going on, reptiles are incredible and engaging. And not only do they grab a kid's attention, but they sustain attention. So a young kid with ADHD who maybe can pay attention for a couple minutes before they get distracted can sustain that attention longer when they have a reptile. So having these kids in the group, they're focused more, they're kind of engaged more, they're paying attention more. And if you kind of adopt the philosophy of like fidgety things with kids, we kind of have figured out that, we need fidgety stuff. And I know a lot of adults that have like fidget spinners or little things that they're messing with, because you focus better if you're fidgeting. So reptiles are kind of, having these kids and they're paying attention. And then in the group, we talk about the animal, we learn about the animal, but then we learn about, we're doing a therapy teaching. So one of my groups is always like turtles and tortoises. And most people are not afraid of turtles and tortoises. Like, people are scared of some lizards. Most people are afraid of snakes, but I don't know anyone that's afraid of a turtle. They're kind of the least threatening reptile. And I start these groups with turtles and tortoises where we talk about the animal. What do they have in common? Their shell is part of their skeleton, and they don't climb out of their shells, and they're wearing boxer shorts like in the cartoons. And then we talk about the differences. Tortoises live on land predominantly. Turtles, live in the water. Sometimes the animals break the rules. But then, everyone knows when a turtle or a tortoise gets scared or nervous, they go in their shell. And they don't come out of their shell if they don't feel safe. And so that's a perfect analogy for kids. When you're feeling overwhelmed, when you're feeling stressed, when you're feeling scared, what kind of a shell can you go into? Maybe it's a physical shell, like I'm going to go sit under my bed, or I'm going to go in my room and turn the lights out, or, or sometimes with kids, I'll teach, like, it doesn't have to be a physical shell, but, put on your earbuds and listen to your favorite song, or zone out in a book or read a journal, whatever you can do that will focus your energy on what you're doing in the moment and kind of distract you from everything that's going on around you. But turtles are a great analogy for that, because they do that. And then for moms and dads, for parents, mom and dad, when the turtle's in its shell, you can't go grab its head and rip the turtle out of its shell. You can't get a turtle to come out of its shell. It's really hard. And so mom and dad, when your kid is in their shell, you can't force them out. When they feel safe, they'll come out. So let's just make a safe environment, and allow the kid to diffuse and calm down. And so I do these groups. I do one with snakes where, again, snakes, some kids are afraid of snakes, and most adults are afraid of snakes that I work with. But if you look at snake behavior, when a snake is scared or nervous, their behaviors are aggressive. They're hissing, they're striking, they're biting. But their intention is not to be aggressive. It's to protect themselves, And I'll tell kids, if snakes could talk, they would say, please don't hurt me, please leave me alone. But the behaviors are aggressive. And so, we use that as an analogy for kids who are physically aggressive, if they're throwing things or punching holes in the walls or hurting themselves. The behaviors are aggressive, and we need to kind of learn how to use our words instead to translate, and to communicate the behaviors. But mom and dad, again, we have to find the function of the behavior. So I started doing these groups. I do one about fear and how fear can be irrational, and, especially with the trauma brain. If kids have experienced trauma, that trauma gets trapped in the brain, and just usually gentle exposure can help to heal that. and having gentle exposure where the adults in your life are having a more healthy response can sometimes work through some of that trauma. It kind of comes from like a mindfulness, Daniel Siegel is like the mindfulness guy. And we talk about that. And then I do another group on just defense mechanisms. We have a bearded dragon and their beards swell up, and blue tongues stick their tongue out. The kids always like that one. And so it's cool because the kids are focused, they're paying attention, they're engaged, and then they're processing these coping skills. And then there's a social component to it. Kids that have a difficult time making friends or sustaining friendships with others, now you have like a common activity or a common interest that you can connect over and bond over. I've seen so much positivity come from having kids just interact with reptiles. I have kids who will come and just hang out, and they'll sit on the couch, like that's like your traditional therapy. Have a seat on my couch, and then here's a ball python, and the kids will just zone out and just relax, just holding a snake. There's something, I don't want to use the word meditative, but I have kids that have really bad anxiety, and for 40 minutes, they'll just sit and focus on the snake, and they'll just calm down and relax. And it's really cool. You can even see their body posture, they're tense and anxious and looking around and distracted. And then 10 minutes later, they're just looking at the snake, and their shoulders are relaxed and they're calm. And it's really cool. It's really cool to see. So thank you. I enjoy it so much.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing too, because I think that, in all of what you just shared, a through thread of it for me too is just this reminder that like we are also animals, and so like these things, like you're saying, like behaviors are functional, it's the same thing for us, it's like, I think that we can kind of like forget sometimes, like we can like bypass that we actually have like these, inside us is like a scared primate.
No, for real.
Sometimes.
For real. And we do this
really
weird thing. We do this weird thing with kids. So like, we have our brainstem, which is like our fight or flight, right? And then we have our midbrain, which is our, our amygdalas and our hippocampus and all that stuff. And then we have our cerebral cortex, and that's our thinking brain. So we'll even show the kids like, this is your brain. And when you get angry, your lid flips. You're not using your thinking brain, you're using your emotion brain.
Yep.
Or, kids with trauma go into fight or flight. And so you have to find ways to kind of soothe that fight or flight brain. And so, and when your kid is getting angry and they're amping up, finding things to help soothe that brain and help get that brain calm as quick as possible is the best thing to do. But you're right, like we are animals and we are triggered by things. We are triggered by stressors. And if we've experienced trauma as a young child where, kids under like 2 sometimes we don't remember things when we were younger than 2. But our body remembers. So
the body keeps the score.
The body keeps the score. That's an awesome book out there for anybody. It's one of the best books. Written really about that. The body keeps the score. Because, you could be a 6-month-old child and be out in public, and a dude with like a black trench coat could terrify you. And you had a fear response as a 6-month-old. And then you could grow up and be 5-6 years old. You don't remember that incident, but you see a dude in a trench coat and you get like a fear response. Like your body remembers those things. And we hold on to trauma in our bodies. And so again, I think I really got to figure out a way to communicate, maybe social media, to communicate with more people in the hobby. Like, and I don't want to hear everybody's business, but, people who are willing to share, their challenges with anxiety, their challenges with, childhood traumas, or their challenges with depression. And what is it about reptiles that has gravitated you to them? Or what is it about keeping them that helps you calm? Because you're right, like the interaction can be really bonding. I talked to a woman last year who was talking about how the repetitiveness of counting 10 mealworms and putting them in a cup and then putting them in the cage, and then counting 10 mealworms and putting them in a cup and putting them in the cage. And that was calming for her. Just that repetitive, simple action. Miss the cage, clean the water dish. Miss the cage, clean the water dish. Like sometimes that soothing, simple task can help, manage things.
Oh yeah. I mean,
There's
I can totally speak to that. I think
yeah.
that was a big part of it for me. Again, as a young person, just, there wasn't a lot of stability, but there was stability within my routine caring for my
You
animals,
found
you
your own
know?
stability for yourself.
Exactly. So there was like,
Yes.
that was like my little calm within the storm. Right. And I think also there's a way in which, like, I don't know, like I think about like the value of mirroring, and how we can learn, and like what you're describing about, like if you're dealing with a reptile that's really scared and really fearful, it becomes pretty intuitive for most people to like learn how to adjust their behavior to try and make that animal less fearful, right?
Right,
And so
right.
you move more slowly, or whatever. You figure out a way to make those interactions more positive, and over time, you can kind of like rewrite that behavior, and
In
you
both
can
of
build
you.
trust with the animal. Exactly. But
Exactly.
that's the thing, is like
Yes, it's
it's happening both
reciprocal. It
ways.
is. So if
Exactly.
you're holding a snake for the first time and you've never held this snake before, you're watching its behavior and you're watching its movements
Hmm.
and you're reading its behavior to see, is it nervous? Is it tense? Is it safe? And the snake's doing that to you. Like, so you guys are doing
Yep.
that to each other. So you're building this like reciprocal trust almost.
Yeah.
And this snake's going to trust me. And then the more you have those gentle experiences. So think about the snake that it's a 3-year-old snake, a 3-year-old boa
Hmm.
constrictor that's been in a bad environment and hasn't been cared for, and interactions have been trauma. The snake has trauma from past interactions or
Hmm.
whatever. And then so you get this snake, whatever happened to the snake, you have this 3-year-old snake, and you're working with it gently, you're giving it time, you're reading its body language, and over the course of 3 or 4 months, the snake isn't aggressive anymore. You've helped to
Hmm.
rewire his brain that people aren't going to hurt me, that people are safe, I don't need to have my defense mechanisms. Those of us that do reptile education, we're always interacting with our snakes, and they're always around people, and they've really kind of figured out that the snakes, that humans aren't harmful. I don't mean my defense mechanisms.
Yeah.
And so you can almost rewire what the brain has done. You're rewiring the neurons in the snake's brain. I don't have any
Yeah.
scientific evidence to back any of that up, but that's just
No,
through
it's
observation. I mean, we've all taken in aggressive
yeah.
animals and seen their aggressiveness and worked with them gently and modified our behavior to help
Yep.
them heal. And we are the same way. So if we've had a
Hmm.
childhood trauma or we've had past experiences that have led to anxiety or depression, being in healthy environments that are predictable and
Hmm.
understood, and the behaviors we can heal through that. Our brain is amazing and we can rewire things. We don't always let
Oh
go of
yeah.
everything, but you could figure out and work through things and heal. And then that dude with the black trench coat at the mall isn't so scary anymore because we've figured
Totally.
out, and we've had enough exposure to black trench coat dudes who haven't hurt us, that
Yeah.
our brain heals. Our brain is such an incredible thing. And every brain on every
Yeah.
living thing on earth is an incredible organ.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah. I
I
mean,
probably
like
went in like 9
just
tangents, man. I'm so sorry.
no, no,
I
no.
could
This
chat
is
about this for
just to
days,
be
dude.
no, dude, to be 100% transparent. This is exactly what the show is about. And
Awesome.
tangents are more than welcome here. Usually Phil is really good about noting that as a disclaimer in the beginning of every episode. So I forgot to mention it, but seriously, I mean, tangent away. And yeah, I really appreciate just like you presencing that, yeah, neuroplasticity, is
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's
And you
present
said
in
mirror neurons
animals.
too. Like
Yeah,
baby, we have
exactly.
mirror neurons in our brain. That's why when you smile at a baby, they smile back at you. And when you laugh, the baby
Yeah.
laughs. Or when the baby laughs, we laugh back, and they make their cute little noises. And that's all mirror neurons. And that's
It's
releasing
amazing.
oxytocin in our brains. There's that
Yeah.
oxytocin chemical, which is our happy chemical, and it releases in our brains and it
Yeah.
releases in the baby brains. And it's very healing.
People experience that with their dogs,
Yeah.
oxytocin, and dogs
Yeah.
experience it with their people,
Dogs
which is
experience with their
it's
people.
so cool. Like,
And that's, I think,
this love hormone.
I agree. And I've been challenged here and there because a lot of people will come up to
Hmm.
me, not reptile people, because they know better. But a
Uh-huh.
lot of like non-reptile people will be like, well, your snake isn't going to bond with you. Your snake isn't connecting with you. My dog, and I bond with my dog, but my dog bonds with
Uh-huh.
me. And the people are
Yeah.
like, your snake isn't going to bond with you. They're not cuddling with you. And first of all, I'm
Mhm.
like, well, we might anthropomorphize a little too much, but I
Mhm.
sometimes maybe feel like my snake is bonding with me. I don't know.
Mhm.
But the important relationship is the one we have with the animal. So
Right.
like that's where our healing comes from. So yes, dogs
Mhm.
bond with their owners and cats bond with their owners. Snakes and lizards and tegus might not bond with us. I think they
Mhm.
know, they recognize this shape of a thing gives me food, so I don't
Oh
have to be
yeah.
worried. I walk in my storefront and all my tortoises come and come up to the
Yeah.
side. They're like,
Oh
this
yeah.
guy's got food. They know this shape
The
of a
food monkey is
living
here.
thing has food monkey. Food monkey. I gotta write that down. Food monkey.
I think
I know.
that's that one comes food monkey comes from Mike's monitors. Mike. I think
Oh, is that
Mike's the
Mike? Oh
founder.
my God.
Yeah, I think that's Mike.
Mike
That's what
is,
I've heard him presence it, but maybe he wasn't
that's
the
so
first, but
funny. Food. I never heard him say that one. He says he has a bunch of hilarious things he says.
yeah, he's
I'm
funny.
so fortunate. He lives like 20 minutes from me. I hang out with Mike a lot.
Oh, that's
He's
awesome.
an amazing dude. He's such an awesome
Yeah.
guy. Food monkey. Yeah, the important bond is the one we have. So if our snake doesn't bond
Uh-huh.
with us, but we're bonded with them and it helps us calm down and it helps us feel good. And then when we're taking care of these animals and they're happy
Mhm.
and they're healthy and they're shedding, that's so gratifying to us. And it helps us feel good. And then it helps us
Yeah,
find, our place and our niche with things. So we
totally.
it's rad. I'm at my therapy clinic actually right now. No one's here, we're
Mm.
closed, but
Mm-hmm.
I have a storefront I rent in Kenosha, and it's kind of off the grid, but I have too
Mm-hmm.
many animals to keep at home. And so
Mm-hmm.
all my animals are at the storefront, but it becomes a place where I can bring the kids, because they're
Oh
not allowed to have
yeah.
kids at your house. So
Right.
like
Yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
having clients at my own personal house.
Yeah.
So I rent a storefront and then the kids can come through. I have a lot of animals on display and bigger enclosures. And then I'm trying to make it more of like an educational facility. But then
Mm-hmm.
that's where I'll have like, 3 or 4 kids hanging out with snakes and we're just kind of zoning and it's really cool. It's fun. But at my therapy clinic, we do have some animals here. We have a couple crested geckos and I just brought a ball python and a bearded dragon here. I have a viv with some dart frogs and the kids just come in
Nice.
and the first thing they do when they get here is they make a beeline to the animals and check on them. And we kind of regulate, like we have a little chart. We don't want the beardy taken out too much. So like the beardy's allowed out for like a half hour a day. So we have a little sign up
Yeah,
thing just
yeah.
to make sure he's not like overwhelmed. But yeah, the
Yeah,
kids,
totally.
there's so many, the dart frogs, we have a couple of kids that come in and they want to feed the fruit flies to the frogs. So they have their
Oh
little
yeah.
chore where they feed them on Mondays and Wednesdays and stuff. And then they're participating in stuff. And that's so gratifying. And that's so good for our self-esteem and stuff. There's
Yeah,
so many
totally.
different things that we can do.
There's so many layers to it. Yeah.
There
I
really
mean, I
are.
think
There
also
really
too,
are.
just like about like what you said around like even if the reptile isn't bonding with you, like I still think that there are other ways in which you can have positive interactions with the animal, even if it's
Yeah,
not bonded to you,
agreed.
like um I definitely experience like what I perceive as like curiosity from my
Yeah.
animals regularly. Where they will like actually approach me, and I've also experienced this, with wild animals. I've had wild garter snakes come up and like check me out. When I'm doing a sit spot outside in the grass. Just like what's this thing doing here? And
That's so crazy.
I've had
Yeah.
that with other animals too. I actually had one time. I'll share this little story. I had a bull elk come up to me, which was a bit intimidating.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if anyone knows, how big bull elks are, but this
They're
is
like
like
12 feet tall. Maybe not that tall.
they're
They're like,
big.
they look down on
They,
you, right? They're like huge.
oh yeah, they're huge. I mean, this is probably at least I want to say at least a 600-pound animal.
Yeah.
And I was sitting in this field watching them, and I had like a wide brimmed hat on, like a cowboy hat. But I was just sitting there watching them for a while, and one of them was they were grazing, and one of them would stop occasionally and like look at me, and he just kind of slowly like separated himself from the rest of them and made his way over to me. And it got to the point where I'm just like sitting there, and he's like he's munching the grass right in front of me, like I could hear his teeth grinding the grass.
That's
And I'm
crazy.
just kind of like, all right, I hope you know that I'm not a threat to you. And I was like, just kind of this
Yeah.
internal monologue, just like, not a threat to you. I'm in your space. I'm just chilling here. But he was just looking right at me. And I mean, I could have reached out and touched his antlers. But
That's insane. That's
I
so
think that
cool.
stuff like that it's so cool to experience that, that like,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially because I think, we tend to inherit this narrative that like, you know, we're destroying nature and like animals are scared of us. And, and obviously like we have, some truths to reckon with in that regard, but that's not the only thing that's true. There's also curiosity
Right.
out there for us. And
There are still animals that aren't, tainted and angry and are still curious about us
yeah,
and curious about the things we're doing. Or there are animals on the other end of it who look at this and go, oh, there's my food monkey, but it's like an alligator in the wild or
yeah.
a black bear that someone's been feeding. And then they get a little too close. There's there's that food monkey in the backyard with the garbage. I'm going to go wait till he drops it off in the container and go grab it.
That's
but right.
becoming more and more of an issue. Yep. Especially in California with black bears.
The relationships that we have with animals is it's so incredible to me. And it never, like you said, garter snakes. I've been seeing garter snakes since I was 5 years old. And I'm
same
48 years old, and I'm still like, oh, that's a garter. Like, I'm all excited. My brain is just whizzing, and it's like the best day of my life that I just found a garter snake still. Or deer. I still get excited to see deer. Like, oh God, look, there's a deer. I'm in the car by myself, and out loud I'll go, oh, look, deer. Like I'm saying it to nobody. No one's in the car with me. But out loud in my mouth, look, there's deer. Look. Nobody. Turkey. We have a lot of turkey around here in Wisconsin. Like, and they're kind of dicks. Like there was a whole thing. I think we were so burned out from the pandemic in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And then we had the riots in Kenosha, Wisconsin. We were just looking for any type of positivity. And there was a male turkey that like, for like 2 hours, like blocked up an intersection in Kenosha, and the cars couldn't go through because he's just like thugging in the road. Like, yeah, what? And he's just like mad at everybody. And then for 2 weeks, Carl the turkey, there was like on the website and on the news, and there was like, oh, Carl the turkey and whatever. And then 2 weeks later, I think Carl got hit by a car and died. So now there's a memorial to Carl. Like we took it way too far. There's a little cross with a turkey picture on it at the corner. Like, R.I.P. Carl.
Yeah, at least he's remembered,
But exactly. But look how we want to save things. We want to help animals, and we're drawn to them. And again, I know why I'm drawn to reptiles. I know why I like them. And I don't want to just assume that everyone likes them for the same reason. But, you had also said, we kind of alluded to it earlier in the conversation that like, if I have anxiety or depression, or I'm on the autism spectrum, I feel different. I feel misunderstood. Maybe people are afraid because of my behaviors in public, because I get overwhelmed easily or whatever, or I'm terrified of social engagement, so I don't make eye contact with people and it rubs people the wrong way or whatever. And these reptiles are misunderstood as well. I mean, people don't like reptiles. People are afraid of snakes. And I think there's some kind of a bond and a connection in that feeling. Like I feel misunderstood. I feel vilified because of whatever. It's not my fault. And reptiles are the same way. It was probably about 8 or 9 years ago. I had a boy on the autism spectrum that I worked with, and he was such a cool kid. And like when I first got assigned him, they're like, you're going to meet your client for the first time. And he's, 11 or 12 years old when I first met him. And in 15 minutes into our first conversation, he had a pet Asian forest scorpion. And I'm like, dude, you're my guy, man. We're gonna connect. And he's huge into reptiles. His mom bought him leopard geckos. He had a bearded dragon. He was just an amazing kid. And I was with him one day, and he said, I think I know how reptiles feel. And I'm like, well, please explain. What are you talking about? And he said, well, I have autism, and usually people, they don't understand autism, so then they're inclined to be afraid of me. And then when I act out or I misbehave, they're more afraid of me. And reptiles are the same way. People misunderstand them, and so they're afraid of them. And then him and I were talking about the best way to conquer that is education. You know, if we educate, and that's a
Oh, yeah.
mantra with us in the reptile hobby: educate, educate, educate.
Totally. Yeah.
And the best way to combat fear is by learning and by educating yourself. And it was cool. He took that information very seriously, and during like Autism Awareness Week or Autism Awareness Month, he was doing presentations at his school. Hi, I have autism, and this is what it means, and this is hard for me, and this is really easy for me, and helped really the kids who didn't understand him and didn't understand autism. He was educating people about autism at his school in 5th and 6th grade. It was so cool. Yeah, it was really cool, because education beats things. And like,
yeah,
I like TikTok. I'm just gonna confess. I'm gonna confess. I got my algorithms just right, where TikTok is all reptiles and all like some cooking, some food stuff, reptiles, travel, some plant people. But like, I think, and maybe I can thank Gen Z for this, people are really starting to normalize mental health and normalize their behaviors. There are some kids I follow on TikTok who have Tourette's disorder. And so they're very open and honest about, they're filming themselves in public where they're ticking or they're having verbal tics, or people with whatever mental health issues. And maybe, again, like maybe it's Gen Z who are figuring this stuff out, that it's okay to talk about it. There's a lot of kids on TikTok who are really open with their mental health challenges and ways that it's worked for them, and ways that they've helped kind of overcome and mitigate their symptoms. And so I appreciate that. I appreciate the open dialogue about mental health, and because we don't want to be judged, and kids don't want to be judged. You know, if something bad happened to me, or I made a bad choice, I'm a bad person. And then that core belief gets ingrained. And then unfortunately, sometimes in some circumstances, it gets reinforced. So, you know, kids where if they're being positive and they're doing a good job, then that gets ignored. Hey, I had a good day at school. I got an A on my math test. Yeah, but your room's messy and you didn't do your chore. Let's, you know, one doesn't take away the other. So, hey, awesome day at school today. Don't forget your chore. But, you know, kids they'll form these core beliefs. I've had these traumatic experiences, or I have this stress at home, or I have this, or I made this bad choice. And then we get in trouble and we get punished. And then schools think I'm a bad kid. Mom thinks I'm a bad kid. I won't go to, my grandma doesn't want me to come over anymore. And this negative self-image gets ingrained. And it's really important to help kids separate that. Like, we're a mix of good choices and bad choices and positive qualities, and we've made mistakes, and we're learning about ourselves as we kind of navigate through that. I don't know how that related to reptiles, but again, it helps kids. Well, because
it totally relates.
I know there's a lot of clients that now have a bearded dragon as a pet at home, or now have a gecko at home, because the parents have recognized the benefit of these animals as pets. And, you know, my son with ADHD had a really hard time focusing, but now if he has a bearded dragon on his lap, he's doing a whole hour Zoom class. Like, I've had a lot of conversations with families where these animals are really helping to calm and relax and focus and soothe and, you know, help to start the healing process, which is, it's so cool. Good job, bearded dragons.
It's just, there's something, seriously, good job, Pagona Vidiceps.
Right.
There's something about that, like, I think that, like, I do see that, like, within Gen Z, there's kind of like this move away from like binaristic thinking, it seems like a lot of the time, and like embracing of more complexity. And I think that that's a good thing, especially like when it comes to like young people developing like that. Like, you know, it's good to know, for them to know that like they can do something bad and not be bad.
Right.
You know,
it becomes part of our timeline.
Do something good. And not be simply good. You know, it's like it's more complicated than that. And
it's way more complicated than that. And it's part of our timeline. I've experienced these things. These things happen. This is how it affected me. And it becomes part of our story, but we have to look at the larger story. It doesn't define you. You know, your whole life story isn't that chapter. That's one chapter. And everyone, you know, a lot of the work that we do with my therapy clinic is meeting kids and helping them find the strengths in themselves and find their positive qualities and really help build on that. You know, we have clients who are incredible incredible creative, they like to paint, they like to draw, they like to write songs, they like to express their feelings in journaling and or whatever. We have some talented sport kids that are incredible at basketball or football, and encouraging that and helping that, because anything that we're gravitated to and anything that we kind of like to do can be a coping skill with kids. If they like to draw and they're good at it, that could be a coping skill. If they like to play basketball, that could be a coping skill. And whatever these kids gravitate to that they find interest in, these activities and hobbies that they like can help them overcome their hurdles if it's done properly and expressed properly and supported. And again, it's so cool to see Reptiles doing that. I love that the reptile hobby is embracive of everybody, and we've accepted, don't mistreat the animals. I think that's the only time that we've been like, you shouldn't have any because you're not doing it the right way. But we've been accepting of everybody in the hobby, and I'm excited to see the next generation of kids join the hobby and be a part of it, and how Reptiles have kind of helped them find their self-esteem and find their niche and overcome some of their experiences. It's gonna happen. We love these animals, and more people are learning how to love these animals.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I mean, so something we've already been touching on to some degree is like, you've been speaking to like folks on the autism spectrum, or who have ADHD, being drawn to reptiles. Like that we also spoke earlier about just like, it seems like a higher percentage of people who have, traumatic backgrounds find themselves liking reptiles, those kind
I'm curious about that. Yeah.
But it feels true. It's like, and it feels similar for me too, observing like, maybe it's just my social media feed in herpetoculture or something like that. But I notice a lot of people, acknowledging neurodivergence, being part of their story within the herpetoculture community, to the extent that it's actually like had me kind of questioning like, oh, whoa, like I might actually be neurodivergent to some degree in like, that actually like that helps make a lot of sense out of like a lot of my life experience up to this point, exploring that more and, with my therapist and everything. But anyway, awesome. I'm curious if you could speak a little bit to that, like to that dynamic. Is that something that you do observe as well? And like, what might be some of the like links there, if that makes sense? I mean, we've already been exploring it to some degree, but I want to get deeper.
I'm gonna try to answer that because my brain already went like pew 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 pew. I think I have ADHD myself. Anyone who knows me in person is like, oh yeah, dude, how have you not known that about yourself? There are a lot of people who are recognizing themselves as neurodivergent, and I like it. The only caveat is I've never really liked the word normal. I don't think, because what's normal for me is not normal for you, and normal is it needs quotes every time we say that word. I mean, we sometimes say neurotypical, but how do we define what neurotypical is? Because that's different for everybody too. Yeah. And what's normal for me
as well,
if you come to my house, I have in my freezer frozen mites, frozen rats, frozen pizzas, ice cream. Like that's totally normal for me. But anyone would come in my house and be like, what in the hell is this? And so I absolutely love more people recognizing their neurodivergence and recognizing how it's been a challenge maybe to, be in a conventional school setting. If you're neurodivergent, the public school system isn't really geared towards helping you yet. They're working on it, but they're a few steps behind still. But also like recognizing how it helps, like this kid with autism that I met, he would say autism, it's challenging because I have a hard time understanding facial expressions, or I have a hard time understanding human interaction is so complex. And our words and our voice tones and our facial expressions and our body postures all communicate, and they can easily miscommunicate. And so I have an example. I'll get to it when I want to finish this thought. But in recognizing neurodivergence, I always just challenge the idea of, well, what's normal? What's neurotypical? And everyone defines that differently. So And even with, I was interviewing, we take interns from our local community college who are getting their bachelor's in social works. And every year I have interns that come to our agency, and we were interviewing them and we were talking about it. And one of the things I bring up all the time is that I could go out and meet 10 9-year-old boys with ADHD. And I could say, meet me at the office at 4:00. And you could take 10 kids, all 9-year-old boys with ADHD, and line them up, and you have 10 extremely different kids. Because even though they all have ADHD, it manifests differently. It affects them differently, and how their environment has responded to them changes how it manifests and how they behave. And so as a therapeutic agency, and just as a human, I always love people, and I love all the differences in people and differences in cultures and households and challenges that everybody has, because life is hard for everybody. We all have challenges. And so recognizing the human and recognizing the individual, it's when we have kids that we work with, I'm not treating ADHD, I'm not treating depression, I'm treating the child, and I'm meeting the child where he or she is at. And they're the big picture of not just their diagnosis and their symptoms, but their strengths and their interests and their favorite song and their favorite food, and what do they do for fun, and what are they afraid of? And, we kind of encompass the whole thing. And neurotypical and neurodivergent doesn't become part of that conversation, because I think we're all neurodivergent. Like, I think, and maybe I've just been seeing the world from such a weird mental health lens that I don't see the bigger picture. I've worked with special needs kids and neurodivergent kids for so long that I'll meet a child and I'm like, this kid is brilliant and amazing, and they're just like a neurotypical 10-year-old. But maybe they're not. Maybe they're neurodivergent. I mean, it's an awesome word, and it's helping people to find some peace of mind and understanding themselves. I felt different. I felt off. Things haven't felt right to me. And neurodivergence is definitely a way to help people explain and understand why they might perceive things differently than others. But I always just challenge the idea of neurotypical, and what does that even mean?
I mean, it feels so, it feels like it depends on like the cultural frame of what is considered normative,
right?
And so it's like, what could be considered like, an expression of like neurodivergence within, this society could be considered completely within the frame of normative, expectations in some other society. It feels like there's some malleability or something there to it, and it has almost to do with like how well one performs within like the frame of society's expectations, whatever those might be. It seems like that's a good
yeah.
Like a lot of people are kind of,
and I think I've always appreciated the people who always fall outside of that. I've always gravitated towards the people who fall kind of outside of that realm. I do an experiment with some of the kids we work with, and I do it in front of the parents too, where we look at our communication and how there's only a small percentage of our communication that's verbal. And neurodivergent kids on the autism spectrum, are so much more sensitive to our nonverbal communication. And so we talk about voice tone and eye contact and body posture and all of those things that convey a different message than what our words convey. So I'll do like an experiment with kids. Well, I'll do it right now. I'll look at your shirt and I'll go, hey, that's a really cool shirt. And then I'll say the same exact words, but I'll go, that's a really cool shirt. Like, I just conveyed a whole, I don't like your shirt the second time I said it, or like, oh, that's a cool shirt, or whatever, like how my face and my voice tone and my body conveyed a whole different message. And autism kids don't. That's a whole complex area that I would just much rather avoid and just not talk to anybody ever. I've had several conversations with several friends of mine that, and this is something that is another kind of area. And when we talk about this, I have some friends with social anxiety, and they have challenges for whatever reason in social engagements. And some of it is that eye contact is intimidating, or some of it is, when you're on the autism spectrum, the gray area of conversation can be challenging. So I could ask you a question and there's an infinite amount of responses you can give me, and not knowing what you're going to say back to me can increase anxiety in a social environment. And that's a challenge that autism spectrum people have. But those or big crowds, being around 100 people at one time. And some of my friends who have helped me, we've done educational shows for the Herp Society where, we're at an 8-foot table and we have snakes that people can come and pet. And there's every hour, 2,000 people walk past us. And they said having an animal and having that anchor and having that reptile in my hand helps cushion the social interaction and reduces that social anxiety. So now it's not an intimidating, I'm looking at you having a conversation. It's here's this reptile. I'm looking at the reptile. You're looking at the reptile. We're talking about the reptile, and it makes that social conversation so much less intimidating. Exactly. There's a common interest. There's a focus. And I love to use the word anchor because it helps kind of ground. It can help ground us. And if we're getting anxious and maybe we're getting dizzy or lightheaded because we're getting nervous in a social situation, these reptiles can ground you and they can kind of anchor you and keep you down. Oh, there's so many things. I get so excited and passionate about this conversation. Because these reptiles are misunderstood. They still really are by non-reptile people. I think the population of reptile people is growing every year. But there still are a lot of people who, don't understand these animals and are afraid of them. And, but there's something about these animals that are attractive to us. And, they're different, they're unique, they're like the masters of their evolutions. Look at snakes. How snakes have evolved to be armless and legless and just incredible. Their senses are, besides, I don't think they're the best. They don't have the best sight, but their smell and their heat pits and just the way that these animals have evolved is just extraordinary, and it's unbelievable.
Absolutely.
And I love working with animals. I will always have a reptile in my life, and I love the connection with people and the conversations with people about reptiles and how it leads into conversations about challenges with anxiety or depression and how we've overcome that.
Totally. Yeah. I mean,
I don't think I answered your question.
No, you did. I mean, you did.
I brought it back, right?
Kind of. Yeah, you brought it back. I mean, the whole conversation has been, I think,
like
to the same question.
A free-form psychoanalytical stream of consciousness.
It's all in there. The listeners will have to sort through it, but that's
sorry,
good.
guys.
It's good for the brain.
Right on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's oh god, I just lost my train of thought.
Sorry.
No, not you at all.
There's just so much to be said about it. There's so many implications to using these animals, to having them as emotional support animals at home. Like there's a caveat to emotional support animals. Yes, I really think these animals are emotionally supportive, and I think they can help people with their anxiety. I don't support, don't bring them to the grocery store. Don't go to Walmart with your 8-foot emotional support boa constrictor, because there's too many dangers, too many safety concerns, too many health issues for you and the snake and the public. And that negative stuff is what gets in the paper and makes the whole hobby look rough. So don't leave your house with your emotional support animal, please. But, there's so many different implications to the soothing impact I've seen it have on kids, and the focus I've seen it help with kids. And there's a kid I work with, a child I work with right now, and his mom and dad got him a bearded dragon. And if he's starting to get anxious and he's starting to kind of stim and get worked up, they're like, go grab your beardy. And he sits, he sits on the couch, the beardy sits on his lap, and it brings him back. I mean, it's so cool.
Yeah. I mean, there's even something about just I don't know. I think about like somatics, and coming back to the body, and just like even just
Yeah.
like the novel like textures and stuff of
Yes. Yeah.
reptiles
We didn't
is
even talk about
so
that yet. Yeah.
it's so interesting. Like, the
Yes.
different types of scale textures, and like the feeling of them crawling around on you, or the feeling of a snake like moving through your hands, and like the feeling of their muscles.
Yes.
It's just so alien that I think
It
it
is.
lends itself to that captivating, quality that you're describing, of just like how
Agreed.
you can just be, wrapped with attention for this animal,
Snake movement
when otherwise it's
particularly
really
is
hard.
very like there's nothing else
Oh
that
yeah.
feels like a snake crawling on you. Could feel their muscles moving on you when they're crawling. And there's
Yeah.
nothing really else. I've never held an octopus. I don't know if it probably feels different.
Yeah.
Um yeah, that's incredible. I have done reptile groups with like the nonverbal population of kids on the spectrum who
Mhm.
they can't speak.
Mhm.
They have a lot of stuff to say, it just can't come out.
Mhm.
And the sensory component to it, bearded dragons have such a different feel than a blue-tongued skink.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah.
a keel scaled snake has a different feel than like a soft, smooth scaled snake.
Totally. Yeah.
Tegus are very unique. Their scales are almost like little beads.
Yeah.
Tegus have a very unique kind of a touch in their scale. And so, yeah, there's even at the basis too, there's such a really cool tactile sensation with just touching these animals.
Mhm.
What was the other
Yeah.
thing? I was going
Totally.
to say one more thing about that too. Something about the groups. I lost it.
That's okay.
It'll come
It'll
back
come
to
back.
me. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Something that actually occurred to me in this conversation that I hadn't actually originally thought to talk to you about this, but it feels important to talk about. It's just like the kind of like where it can go wrong with reptiles and like mental health, because we do see that, as well, where it's like
Yeah.
sometimes.
That was the other caveat I was just going to bring up too. Like if
Yeah.
you're thinking of getting a pet for your child, like we don't want anyone to be aggressive or harm an animal.
Mhm.
I have worked with kids who have maybe been aggressive towards animals in the past. And
Mhm.
I think sometimes, if you have a child and they've hurt an animal, we're getting into a little sensitive subject,
Yeah, yeah.
listeners, just heads up.
Trigger
But
warning, trigger
yeah,
warning for our listeners. Yeah.
if you've had a young child, or a young child that has been aggressive towards an animal, there's different reasons for that. Um, Unfortunately, it's kind of become like an accepted red flag that a kid that hurts an animal is going to grow up and hurt people.
Mhm.
That's not always the case. And it's important to especially work more significantly with those kids to work through whatever it was that led to them harming an animal.
Mhm.
But yeah, it seems to be pretty accepted in society that harming an animal is just like a red flag to hurting a person. And I'm not saying that it's not. And I think
Mhm.
sometimes we have a tendency, well, my son or daughter, hurt this animal when they were young, so I never want them to be around an animal ever. But you're not teaching them how to learn how to be gentle with animals. And so I have
Mhm.
had clients that have been aggressive towards animals before, and they always have to be supervised. There always has to
Mhm.
be an adult that's not just supervising, but actively there. Like the bearded dragon will be on my lap and you can
Mhm.
touch, but just be gentle with touching for 2 minutes. Good
Mhm.
job. Let's put him back. See how he's this? If he's stressed out, we can tell he's stressed out because he's going to do A, B, and C. And we're not going to
Mhm.
be, and you have to be, this is why you have to really be attuned to your kid and attuned to the client and attuned to the
Yeah.
animal. That's where this work can be challenging, because if I'm doing like a one-on-one therapy session with a kid and I have a bearded dragon or a snake or whatever, I'm watching the animal's behaviors and I'm watching the kids' behaviors, and I'm watching mom who maybe is worried about their kid getting upset. So mom's getting anxious, and then the kid can feel mom's anxiety. So now the kid's getting anxious. And then the bearded
Mhm.
dragon's like, what? And then everybody's anxious. I've had that just a
Yeah.
couple times. And you really just have to be very vigilant in paying attention to it. But if a kid's had, aggressive behaviors towards animals, they can learn not to. It just takes a
Yeah.
tremendous amount of work and a tremendous amount of compassion and patience, because we don't, I think if we vilify that behavior, I don't want to say we're reinforcing it, but when you're taking something away, you have to replace it with something, and if we're taking something away from a kid, we have to replace it with something. And normally what we do, which is kind of what discipline should be, is, replacing a negative behavior with a positive one. If we say, hey, don't run in the hallways, we should say, hey, you should walk in the hallways. So we're teaching what needs to be done. Right. And so if we're worried about kids being aggressive towards somebody else, we tend to want to not have them be around, oh, he punched the neighbor, so he's never going to play with the neighbor ever again. Well, he's not learning how to be nice to the neighbor. He's not learning how to play with the neighbor. That's a lot of what we do with our therapy company, is that hands-on teaching. Kids who need to learn how to make friends and learn how to play nicely with others. We're going to go to the park and we're going to play with others, or we're going to come to the office and do board games or do crafts where we're hands-on teaching these kids how to do the positive skills and the positive interactions. So you could teach the gentle touch, but that is always something that could potentially go wrong. And the animal, like, I'm not going to take an aggressive bearded dragon. And people listening out there, there are those, like, there are bearded dragons who, one of the worst bites I ever got from a reptile was from a bearded dragon. I had taken one in that had been kind of neglected in a previous home, and I wasn't even ready for it. And he bit my thumb. It didn't break the skin because he literally bit my thumbnail. But it felt like I hit my thumb with a hammer. I'm not kidding you. It was a powerful, it hurt really bad. That was a rough bite. And so, in knowing the kid and knowing the behaviors and knowing the risks and kind of, well, this could go wrong or that could go wrong, and planning ahead. If this starts to happen, you have to plan ahead, but knowing the animal and making sure I have safer animals and stuff. If I have a kid who's more aggressive, we're going to do it slowly. Here's the animal in its Tupperware container. You're going to hold the Tupperware container with the animal in it. You did a really great job. Touch the lid. Let's pet the lid of the Tupperware container. Yeah. Okay, now, in a couple weeks steps. We can kind of do that. Yeah. But I've seen, like, we have some kids we work with, and I know some kids who have a really hard time focusing, and they're very emotionally sensitive, and they can get angry and cry like really, really quickly, or they can't focus on something and they get really, really frustrated. And then they're one of my employees have brought them to the storefront, and these kids have like helped me like tongue feed geckos. Here, let's put the super worm on the tongue. Let's give it to the gecko. Okay, we're going to tongue feed this guy now. Hey, the tortoises need food. Let's grab some collard greens and feed them to the tortoises. And I've seen like these kids who have a really hard time, high anxiety and low attention, flip and be really calm and be focused in some of these activities. And so I like having kids come to the shop, and we'll feed the tortoises, and I have a little pond with some aquatic turtles in it, and we'll grab the little turtle pellets and throw like we're at the pond feeding the ducks, like we're feeding the turtles the pellets, and that's cool. I've seen that too. But as far as risks and things that can go wrong, it's knowing your animal and knowing your animal's limits and understanding their behaviors, which most of us in the hobby do. But then it's understanding, not only understanding the individual child and his triggers and his warning signs, but also just generally understanding what ADHD looks like, or what depression or anxiety looks like, and knowing anxiety, and then knowing your child, and then how the child manifests anxiety. So I'm not saying that everyone listening like should go, everyone should have a pet reptile. Like everyone should have a pet reptile.
No, of course, it's complex.
It is complex, and I've been doing it for a while, and there's just a lot of things. And I still, like, anytime I'm running a group or anytime I'm doing an individual thing, I'm like sweating. Like, please,
you're tracking a lot of things.
Yeah, please be gentle, please this and that. And I'm like, I need to be a chameleon where one eye can be on the kid and one eye could be on the this. And I'm like, I have to evolve into having my eyes over here like this, so I could.
Yeah.
I
mean, You spoke to something that just triggered something for me too, of just like this again on the subject of mental health and herpetoculture, of just you spoke about like knowing the limits of the animal and the child, but also I think this like it's just as applicable, you know, with adults in herpetoculture. That I think that something that I've spoken to in the past, one of our guests, Philip Tremper, comes to mind. We talked about this a lot, about just how herpetoculture can teach you about your own limitations.
Yeah.
You know, it can be a teacher of that, because
That's
the
awesome.
experience of getting in over your head, you know,
Yeah.
like with the collection, having too many animals, suddenly it goes from being like something
Yeah.
that like we're talking about as like a positive and as a therapeutic or beneficial part of your life, can quickly become a very stressful part of your life. So I'm curious if we could speak to that a little bit at all, just like that kind of dynamic.
That's a conversation that I haven't really spoke on before, but that's an awesome conversation to have. I've talked with so many people, and I've done it myself. We get into the hobby, we get excited about everything. Everything's right there. We get all these animals. I am burned out. I need to downsize. We downsize. Oh, I have some room now. I'm feeling better. I'm gonna upsize. And a lot of us in this hobby have kind of ridden that wave of going up and down. But that's a good conversation to have. And I need to spend more time kind of looking into that a little bit more, because we all I think most of us have maybe gotten our collections too big and then realize we're burned out and need to downsize. And, you know, again, when I talk about mental health and reptiles, I'm always looking at it, you know, from both sides. Like from in the mental health field, how am I using reptiles to help in the mental health field? And then in the reptile hobby, how is our mental health affecting the reptile hobby? So I want to have mental health in the reptile hobby, and I want to have reptiles in the mental health hobby, separate but together. So one thing to speak on is there's two things that people tend to do, and most people tend to do it. We have a really hard time recognizing burnout in ourselves, and sometimes we don't see the signs. So maybe we're not sleeping, we're not getting enough sleep, or we're not sleeping as well, or we're too busy with chores and we have too many animals and we're not taking breaks to feed. We're not taking those mental health days when we need to, because with reptiles, it feels good to be taking care of them, but you need to take care of them. You can't like, oh, I'm going to skip my storefront for a week. And like, you know, you have to always be, so if you're not feeling good, the animals still need to be cared for. And that could be a double-edged sword, because I've talked to people who have said, you know, I'm feeling depressed and overwhelmed, but my reptiles have gotten me out of bed and gotten me to take care of them because I have to. But then I know people who have like, I've gotten depressed and I haven't paid attention to my animals. So it goes kind of both ways. But two things we do is we have a hard time recognizing burnout in ourselves, and we have a hard time asking for help. And I 100% am guilty of asking other people for help, because in my mind, I'm like, these are my animals. This is my challenge. This is my problem. And I've learned really, really well in the last 2 years that it's okay to ask for help, and that people want to help. People want to help. People want to be supportive. You know, if just a quick pause, look at how this hobby comes together when something happens. You know, God bless Brian and what he's going through right now, but the hobby has band to support him. And when other things have happened, I've been at US art auctions where we've raised thousands and thousands of dollars to support somebody's medical fund, or somebody had, you know, a tragedy. The hobby, we're so quick to jump in and help others. And I love that. And I have a peace of mind. I'm not trying to sound like I'm bragging or anything, but it's comfortable knowing that if anything happened to me, or I needed help at the storefront with my animals, that I'd have 100 people there helping me out. And most people in this hobby know that if something happens, just post on Facebook and you got tons of people coming in to help you. I love that we do that. And I love that we take care of each other. But we also need to be able to ask for help more. Badgerland has volunteers, and Badgerland operates out of my storefront. I rent a storefront in Kenosha. It's off the grid. My windows are still boarded up from the pandemic and the riots, but it helps with some anonymity, so I don't have to worry about anything. I have cameras on the inside, but I don't want to have anything happen or draw any, negative attention to myself. I was having nightmares that looters and rioters in Kenosha were going to be running around with snakes. Like, no.
Like that Pee Wee Herman.
Pee Wee running out of the pet shop. When he grabs the snakes last. And so Badgerland operates out of there. God, what was I talking about? I lost my train of thought now because you said Pee Wee and I was
ruined it with the Pee Wee Herman. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Oh, I have volunteers. I got myself back.
Yeah, volunteers.
And so I have WPS. Major shout out to my friend Madison Culver. My wife Sarah and I have met Madison Culver through Badgerland, and she lives like 6 minutes from my house, and she's a rock star, and she helps me at the facility 2 or 3 times a week, and she's helping me mist cages and feed things. She's a volunteer for WPS when I do my birthday parties. She's a volunteer. She's our Young Explorer coordinator for the Herp Society. She's on the board for Badgerland. She's just an amazing rock star, and she's been incredible. There's so many of the Badgerland. My wife Sarah's incredible support. Shout out Michelle Miller, Rex Roch, Mariano. I'm shouting out names now like I'm on the radio. Michelle, Melanie, Scott, Claire. It's so great to have those volunteers and have those people helping me. But taking a step back, we sometimes don't recognize that we're getting burned out, and it's always I'm good about noticing it now, and I'm good about recognizing I need to take a day off. I need a mental health day. I need some help with this or that, and I've been way better about asking for help, but it's something I literally just learned how to do in the last couple of years. But then having friends, having people looking out for you and being receptive to that. Hey, I think you might be getting burned out. Hey, let me come over and help you, and having friends in the hobby or, friends that are supportive of that helps. I did it once before, and I think we need to do it again. My wife, Sarah's amazing, and she's done a lot of incredible stuff. But one of the things that she's recently created is a nonprofit called Arrow. So Badgerland's a 501c3 nonprofit, but she made a program called Arrow, ARRO, Association of Reptile Rescue Organizations, and it's a nonprofit network for reptile rescues in the United States. And so, in order to be a part of Arrow, it's kind of like an accreditation, I guess. So if your rescue if you have certain quarantine standards and adoption processes and 501c3 status where you can accept donations and stuff, then you can be a part of this Arrow organization. And then she's networked with Dubia.com and Morph Market and Redline Shipping and Pangea and these companies that, hey, if you're an Arrow rescue, you can get like a discount on your gecko food, or you can get a discount for shipping or whatever. And it's incredible that she's done that. And so she's had conversations with the Arrow board and with other directors of reptile rescues across the country. And the topic of burnout and compassion fatigue has come up a lot. And in mental health, we talk about compassion fatigue a lot. It's just a fancy therapy word for burnout, where you either you've dealt with so much stress and so much craziness in mental health. DCFS workers suffer from compassion fatigue, or police officers, firefighters, nurses, EMTs. Because of the constant stress in the work that you do, you either just like stop caring and you don't care what happens to your clients anymore, and you become kind of hardened to it and just like distant and detached, or you want to help everybody. So you're not sleeping, you're not eating, you're working, you don't have boundaries anymore because you like want to help everybody, and it's just exhausting. And it's a reality in the mental health. Mental health professionals have to be very mindful of compassion fatigue. And so when I with my staff at work, we meet every week. I'm meeting with them, and I want to hear about your kids and what's going on, but how are you doing? Do you need to take a day off? Is everything okay? Have you had a particularly, we work with kids who are suicidal, kids who are aggressive, and it could be scary, when you get a call from a kid, hey, I cut my wrist and it's bleeding. What do I do? Trigger warning. I should have said that beforehand. I apologize. We gotta drop a trigger warning there.
I can do that. Yeah.
So we have conversations in mental health about compassion fatigue. So now going back to conversations with Arrow and with the directors and organizers of reptile rescues, there's huge compassion fatigue and burnout in that too. So not just people with larger collections who we get overwhelmed or whatever. Being in a reptile rescue where every animal, you get 10 bearded dragons a week and they're emaciated and they're dehydrated and they didn't have UV, and all of the animals that you're taking in are unhealthy and sick. And if we know reptiles, we know that by the time they're visibly sick, they've been sick for a long time. And they're like, nice knowing you, I'm going to die in 5 minutes because you're not supposed to see that I'm sick because I would be a prey animal in the wild. And so there could be huge burnout and huge exhaustion in working with in running a rescue and working with these sick animals all the time. And I think the tendency to maybe become, I don't want to say jaded, but, you know, it can be difficult, I think, sometimes to be a rescue and we have 20 bearded dragons that are unhealthy and skinny and dehydrated and haven't had UV. And then we go to like, there's like 100 bearded dragons for sale at a pet shop and you're like, oh, whatever.
Yeah.
But the percentage of beardies that are cared for greatly outnumbers the percentage of beardies that aren't. And when we take animals in, we're non-judgmental, and rescues need to be non-judgmental, because if you're judging that person for surrendering their animal, they're not going to surrender the animal. And so we have to be, but then you really have to be aware of your own burnout and your own fatigue, because you want to be non-judgmental towards the people surrendering animals, because you want them to surrender it. You don't want the animal to die. But the constant seeing of sick animals all the time. And so I started doing Zoom meetings and Zoom presentations for rescue people. And we went over compassion fatigue and how to recognize it and how to notice it in yourself and how to take care of yourself and take those steps for treatment. And we got to do another one of those soon, because it was a really awesome conversation to have.
Yeah, it's such an important topic. I mean,
it really is.
It's so huge. I mean, I think that I can own personally that I just had, you know, a little wake up call for myself in terms of burnout. I just left for a few days for a camping trip and just kind of unplugged and spent some time with my partner and our little wolf camping down in a place that we really love.
That's
and
awesome.
I wasn't aware, like I knew I was burned out going into the trip, but I wasn't aware of how badly burned out I was until I was down there, and I was like, oh wow, like I've been shredding a little.
It's hard to recognize it, and it's hard to recognize the signs, and not to get all political and weird, but like in our country, we've really glorified like working overtime, and I don't take a break, and I get 4 hours of sleep at night, and I'm working 12-hour days, 7 days a week. Don't. Hustle culture. Don't do that. You know, in the last few years of my life, I have a routine. Like my dogs wake me up at like between 5 and 5:30 in the morning, which is early, but I feed them 5:30 in the morning. They eat, they go outside and go potty. And then I go lay on the couch and I fall back asleep till 7:30 or 8. And then I'm in bed. My wife makes fun of me because at 10:30 on the nose, I'm like, I'm going to bed. I don't always fall asleep right away, but at 10:30 at night, I'm in bed and doom scrolling TikTok or YouTube for a half hour or whatever. But I'll be like, Sarah, I'm getting ready for bed. And she's like, it's 10:25, Bill. You have 5 more minutes. You're not going to bed earlier. And so having that routine has helped. But like, burnout is so real, because like families can't operate now where one dad goes to work 9 to 5 Monday through Friday and mom stays at home with the kids. Like families aren't like that. And it's that non-traditional, like that traditional family from the 50s isn't a thing anymore. But you can't afford to have one person working and one person not. And there's so many homes where mom and dad have to work, and either they're working at the same time while the kids are at school, or their mom works first shift, dad works second shift, and then mom has to work part-time or dad has to work weekends. And like people like, yeah, man, like people are proud of it, I think, in some degree, which good for you. That's awesome. Because I leave the house at like 9:00, 9:30 in the morning, and I get home at 8:00 or 9:00 at night. So I'm doing the 12-hour days myself, but
yeah,
the reptiles are healing in the same way. So it's not work when I'm over there. But
yeah,
no,
totally.
get sleep, take care of yourself, take vacation, take time off.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be like the hustle. If you like the hustle, good, but recognize when you need to take a break from it. Recognize when you need a vacation, when you need a day off. I wish
we
could.
Okay if it doesn't work for you, it's like,
right.
I think that there's a way in which, like, I mean, for some people, like the hustle culture thing, the motivational Instagram posts, and all of that stuff can be motivating and helpful.
Right.
And like, all power to the folks who can look at that stuff and be motivated by it. Like, but there's also a lot of people that's just not the way to motivate them at all.
No, there needs to be a balance. Yeah. Like things aren't going to happen if you're just sitting there. But
right.
Let's also take a step back from the whole working 2 full-time job, not especially I got 3 hours of sleep and and I'm guilty of it myself sometimes, but
get it to be a slippery slope
because that
only ends in tragedy and tiredness.
Yeah. And us in the reptile hobby, it affects our reptiles. If we get burned out and shut down and they're not getting misted and they're not getting fed and they're not on their cycles or their UV burned out and we haven't replaced it yet. That's why it could be a double-edged sword, because I've had conversations with people who are like, I would just stay in bed and I don't have the motivation to get out, but my reptiles give me the motivation to get out of bed because they need me to feed them. They need me to miss them. And then that gets the ball rolling for me. Now I'm out of bed. Now I'm doing my chores. Now I'm in a shower. But I've also had conversations with people where it hasn't had that power because our own self-esteem, our core beliefs, our negative self-talk sometimes can be more powerful. In those conversations with people, I'm not motivated to get out of bed. I'm not motivated to go do things. And I don't want bad things to happen to my animals, but I'm stuck in this loop. And there's different ways to get out of it. Baby steps. Hey, why don't you just get out of bed and go get your spray bottle and just miss the cage. And sometimes just getting that started can help build that motivation.
Definitely.
There's other conversations to have, but that's another, everyone's
maybe
different.
For another podcast sometime we can deep dive even more on that. But
right on. Absolutely.
I'm also cognizant that we're almost at 2 hours already, and I want to be respectful of your time.
That's amazing. That's awesome. I know I could talk about this. You guys if anyone's listening and you haven't met me in person, I'm pretty much in the Midwest shows. Message me and say hi. But if you know me in person, I could talk for hours and hours about this subject, about reptiles. Like we're all just reptile nerds connecting with other reptile nerds because they're the best. They're totally awesome.
Totally. Well, before we kind of like fully wrap it up, maybe we can just kind of slowly start to wrap the bundle. But I'm curious, like, what does like the future look like for you? Or do you have any changes that you anticipate? You just gonna keep working on what you're working on?
I want to keep working on what I'm working on. I have several hats, but I'm not at a point in my life where I want to get rid of one of the hats. And everything is kind of balanced. I sometimes call myself the octopus waiter from the cartoons, where they have all the tentacles and they're balancing plates and cups, but they got it. Everything's balanced. I'm better in my life now than I was, but I kind of have sometimes felt that way. I really want to formalize the whole like reptile and therapy kind of stuff. I would love to have more conversations with people in the reptile community. Obviously private, obviously confidential. But I would love to hear more stories about people's challenges with anxiety or depression or, childhood experiences, and how has reptiles specifically helped them? What is it about reptiles that have helped them? And again, it could be all animals. It could be dogs. I know animals are healing. They're non-judgmental. They're kind of unconditional in their dependency and bonding with us or
Mhm.
bonding with us or whatever. But I really want to have more conversations with people in the hobby about how reptiles have kind of helped them. Maybe write a book about it, maybe explore things a little
Yeah.
bit more. I enjoy the reptile education, so not just the therapy piece, but that's just, it's so gratifying to me. I see normal ball pythons all the time. They're beautiful snakes. I love normal ball pythons, but a normal ball python might not make a hobbyist excited. But when you go to like a
Yeah.
daycare and like a 4-year-old kid sees a normal ball python and their mind is blown, and they see bearded dragons and they know what it is, like the
Mhm.
education part and sharing my enthusiasm about these animals with the general public has been so rewarding, and it's so gratifying. And this
Absolutely.
summer I'm starting to get really booked. I have, not just with the therapy stuff, but I have school assemblies, and I'm doing scout events, and more birthday parties, and I'm friends with some of the other there's a handful of really awesome reptile educators in the Midwest, cold-blooded parties, crosstown exotics, coal black exotics in Illinois. Tatiana's Tiny Zoo is a friend of mine who just started doing education. My friend Dan Thomas started to do reptile. And that's not the therapy
Mhm.
part of it, but that's the
Mhm.
education part. And I really just see my hobby going into the direction of, taking in rescue animals and educating and sharing it, and, building on that therapy component, and,
Yeah.
helping kids, to heal, helping kids to feel better.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
I love to
thanks.
hear it. I'm glad that you're doing it. I think it's needed. It's a niche, that needs to be filled within herpetoculture, and I'm glad that somebody's
Yeah,
filling it.
thank you.
And maybe there's room for more of us, because it's needed.
I hope
There's
so. I
so
mean,
much value.
Ryan McVeigh and I, to give Ryan, I could never stop giving Ryan shout outs.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
to give Ryan McVeigh a shout out, like he made a comment to me once, like I forgot how the exact words were, but all of us in the reptile hobby have a responsibility to educate. So any crested gecko or ball python breeder, anyone who maybe has 3 or 4 beardies as pets, we all have a
Mhm.
responsibility to educate and teach others about
Mm.
these animals. And in doing so, you could still, you said Phil Tremper it was, who
Yeah, yeah.
how we learn about ourselves through these
Totally.
animals. And accepting who we are, and accepting our differences, and accepting our mistakes and flawed nature or whatever, because we're all beautiful, and we all have
Mhm.
incredible qualities, and life is life for all of us, and we have to make the most of it. So we all, if you have one pet snake, and the kids get excited about it, obviously don't bring it to Walmart, please, but educate, come to the shows and share your passion with others and share your excitement with others. And another gigantic shout out to just the reptile hobby for how we've really
Mm.
destigmatized mental health. I love being able to connect with my friends who have challenges with depression or anxiety, and how open and honest they are with themselves about it and with others, and how supportive we could really be as a hobby. And with some of the toxicity and some of the drama that we see in the reptile hobby, I have the utmost respect for all of us who really are just honest and truthful about the challenges that we have, and being open to share that with others, and being embracing and supportive of others. Like the rest of the world needs to learn from us on how we communicate about mental health,
Mm.
then it
Love
wouldn't
that.
be so stigmatized.
That's true. Yeah, it's well said. Thanks for that, man.
Yeah, thanks, dude.
Well, I think it's time for our closing question, which is, as my shirt indicates, why herpetoculture?
That
And
is an awesome
um,
shirt, and that's such an
thanks.
awesome question. Um,
Yeah.
these animals are so different, and they're so
Mhm.
unique, and they're so fascinating. And when you look at just how reptiles have evolved generally as an order, and then if you look at the individual, I mean, there are geckos that can glide through the air. There are snakes who can spread. Snakes are already insane, but then a snake that can spread its rib cage and glide from tree to tree, the paradise flying
Yeah.
snake.
Yeah.
the anoles that can hold their, like they have a little bubble on their nose and they could be underwater for X number of, minutes just by breathing through a little bubble. These animals are incredible. I don't know the exact article, but I read an article once where I think it was 2 or 3 generations of anoles in Cuba have already changed their toe pads and their foot structure because of the hurricanes. So there are hurricanes in Central America and Cuba or whatever. And then like 2 generations later, the anoles' feet are already different looking than 2 generations before. And how quickly they evolved to have different looking feet because of getting blown out of trees from a hurricane or whatever. I'll have to find that article again. These animals are, reptiles are unique. They're fascinating. They're incredible, and they are resilient and adaptive, and so are we. And that's the message that we all can think about. That however we define ourselves, however we identify, however we choose to express that in our social environments or whatever, any negative experiences that we've had in our lives growing up, we are adaptive, we are resilient, and we are fascinating. And just the same with reptiles. And the reptiles need us. Like if you follow the whole invisible arc idea on how these animals are becoming extinct and they're so sensitive to the environment and sensitive to climate change, we need to be the stewards of these animals to help keep them on the planet. That's why I choose herpetoculture too, because these animals are sensitive to the climate and they require our support to stay around.
Awesome. I love that, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you,
I feel
Roy.
like, I feel grateful for your willingness to come on and just discuss these topics. It's a lot, and there's a lot.
I was very
about,
flattered when you reached out to me.
So
you guys do an incredible job. You have a fantastic podcast, and I was very honored to have you reach out to me. So thank you for this opportunity. Very cool.
Of course, yeah. I mean, we got to do it again because there's still a lot more to be said, and
I agree. Hopefully, I've made some progress, and I have more to talk about.
Yeah, well, that's
next
great.
time.
I'm sure.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been incredible.
Yeah. And also, where can people find you on like social media or any of that stuff before I close it out?
Yeah, well, I have my personal Facebook is just Bill Stewart. My profile picture is my wife and kids. But WPS Reptiles.
Okay, I can put a link to it too.
This logo.
Nice.
I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I'm on TikTok. I need to be more active. I'm trying to do some YouTube stuff. I have like 3 YouTube videos in there. Like the production value it's me on my Galaxy phone. Like, what's going on, dudes? I'm trying to do some YouTube. I'm trying to do, I do some Instagram. Right now, my YouTube and TikTok and all that stuff is more reptile and reptile education. But I really would like to explore the reptile therapy angle in my YouTube videos and in my TikTok. I haven't done that yet, but I'm getting there. So I'd like to have some of the reptile therapy content on my social media. So maybe next time we meet in a few months or whatever, I'll have more to talk about regarding that.
That sounds great.
Yeah, Insta, TikTok, Facebook.
Awesome.
And I'll see you guys at NARBCs.
Yes, exactly. Hopefully we'll be there. We're going to try and make it out to October, Tinley.
Awesome.
We were like this close to making it to March, but it just didn't work out. Just too much going on. So hopefully we'll make it out to October and we'll get to meet face to face, hang out.
That would be awesome, Roy. That would be so cool.
Awesome. All right, I'm gonna hit the little button, stop the recording.